Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the entire history of the United States. From the time it was first discovered to the modern nation we know today, we'll explore every major event, era, and turning point, step by step. So by the end of this video, grab a seat and let's start this fascinating journey into American history. Our journey begins just before the year 1492. At that time, there was no country called America, but millions of people had already been living here for thousands of years. They were the indigenous nations. Today we know them as Native Americans, along with the great civilizations of the Inca, Maya, and Aztec. Across the vast lands of North America, many different tribes thrived. Some were hunters and gatherers, others were skilled farmers. Their cultures were diverse. Some lived in dense forests, some along the coast, and others in high mountain regions. Meanwhile, Europe was emerging from the Middle Ages and was eager to explore new horizons. Adventurers and sailors, funded by kingdoms, were searching for gold, silver, and spices. The age of exploration had already begun with Portuguese and Spanish voyages. In 1492, with support from Spain, an Italian navigator, Christopher Columbus, set out on a daring journey westward, hoping to find a new sea route to India. After weeks at sea, he finally reached the islands of the Caribbean. Although Columbus believed he had reached the shores of India, in reality, he had arrived at the doorway of a new world. This moment marked the beginning of European colonization, an event that would forever change the history of the Americas. But it is important to remember, America was not an unknown land before Columbus. It was home to rich cultures, civilizations, and people for thousands of years. Columbus's arrival marked not just discovery, but also the beginning of an era of conflict between new arrivals and the native peoples. After Columbus's first voyage, waves of Spanish explorers and conquistadors began crossing the Atlantic. Their missions were fueled by three powerful motives: God, gold, and glory. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon landed on the coast of Florida while searching for the mythical fountain of youth. Just a few years later, Hernán Cortés led the conquest of the mighty Aztec Empire in present-day Mexico, 1519 to 1521. The Spanish were amazed by the wealth and architecture of Tenochtitlan, but within 2 years they had destroyed the empire, aided by superior weapons and the devastating spread of European diseases. In South America, Francisco Pizarro conquered the Inca Empire in the 1530s, capturing vast riches of silver and gold. These treasures fueled Spain's rise as the most powerful empire of the 16th century. The Spanish crown quickly established colonies across the Caribbean, Mexico, Central America, and South America. They built cities, spread Catholicism through missionaries, and created an economic system based on forced labor. Native peoples were subjected to the encomienda system, which demanded tribute and labor, often under brutal conditions. In 1565, the Spanish founded St. Augustine in Florida, the first permanent European settlement in what would later become the United States. This marked the beginning of European presence on North American soil, but this conquest came at a terrible cost. Millions of indigenous people died, not only from war and enslavement, but also from smallpox, measles, and other diseases brought by Europeans. Entire cultures were forever changed or wiped out. The Spanish conquest reshaped the Americas, laying the foundation for centuries of colonization, exploitation, and cultural blending, a history marked by both tragedy and transformation. While Spain dominated much of the Caribbean, Mexico, and South America, other European powers began looking for opportunities in North America. In 1534, French explorer Jacques Cartier sailed up the St. Lawrence River and claimed vast regions of Canada for France. Unlike the Spanish, who sought gold and conquest, the French economy was built mainly on the fur trade. Beaver pelts, in particular, became a prized commodity in Europe, and French traders developed close alliances with Native American tribes, such as the Huron and Algonquin. These alliances were not only economic but also military, as conflict with other tribes and European rivals intensified. In the early 1600s, Samuel de Champlain established Quebec City in 1608, which became the center of New France. French missionaries, known as Jesuits, traveled deep into the interior, seeking to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity, while explorers pushed further west and south, mapping the Mississippi River Valley. Meanwhile, the Dutch entered the contest for North America. In 1624, they established a colony of New Netherland, centered around the mouth of the Hudson River. The bustling settlement of New Amsterdam, located on Manhattan Island, became the heart of Dutch trade. The Dutch West India Company encouraged settlement, trade, and alliances with local tribes. New Amsterdam grew into a diverse trading hub, with settlers from across Europe, Africans brought as enslaved laborers, and free people from many backgrounds. The city would later evolve into one of the most important in American history. By the mid-1600s, competition between European empires for land and resources intensified. In 1664, the English seized New Amsterdam from the Dutch, renaming it New York in honor of the Duke of York. This marked the beginning of English dominance along the Atlantic coast. The French and Dutch presence in North America may not have been as extensive as Spain's, but their legacy, through trade, alliances, and culture, would leave a lasting mark on the continent's history. By the mid-19th century, the United States faced its greatest internal crisis. A deep divide had formed between the industrial North and the agricultural South, and at the heart of the conflict was slavery. The South's economy depended on enslaved labor, especially for cotton production, while the North opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. Tensions reached a breaking point in 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Southern leaders feared he would abolish slavery altogether. In 1861, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America under President Jefferson Davis. The Civil War began when Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. For the next 4 years, America was torn apart. The Union Army, led by General Ulysses S. Grant, battled the Confederate forces commanded by General Robert E. Lee. Major battles such as Antietam, Gettysburg, and Vicksburg determined the fate of the nation. In 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate territory to be free. This shifted the war's purpose. It was no longer just about preserving the Union, but also about ending slavery. Finally, in 1865, after the bloody siege of Petersburg, Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, bringing the Civil War to an end. The Union was preserved, and slavery was abolished through the 13th Amendment. But the cost was staggering. More than 600,000 lives were lost, making it the deadliest war in American history. The years that followed were known as Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877. During this period, the Southern states were gradually brought back into the Union. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to all people born in the U.S., and the 15th Amendment ensured voting rights regardless of race. For a brief moment, African Americans gained political power and representation, but progress was met with resistance. White supremacist groups, such as the Ku Klux Klan, used violence to intimidate freedmen, and discriminatory laws known as Jim Crow laws began to emerge. In 1877, federal troops were withdrawn from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction and leaving African Americans vulnerable to nearly a century of segregation and disenfranchisement. The Civil War and Reconstruction reshaped the United States, abolishing slavery, strengthening the federal government, and setting the stage for future struggles for civil rights. After the end of Reconstruction in 1877, the United States entered a period of rapid industrial growth and profound social change known as the Gilded Age. Factories, railroads, and mines spread across the nation. Steel production boomed, led by industrialists like Andrew Carnegie, while John D. Rockefeller dominated the oil industry. Big business and railroads created immense wealth, but also harsh working conditions, child labor, and extreme inequality. Immigration surged as millions arrived from Europe, seeking jobs and a better life. Cities grew rapidly, leading to overcrowding, poor sanitation, and social tension. Urban neighborhoods were often divided along ethnic lines, creating both vibrant communities and social conflict. During this period, the federal government generally supported business interests over laborers, but the seeds of reform were sown. Labor unions like the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor organized strikes and protests, demanding fair wages, reasonable hours, and safer working conditions. By the early 1900s, reform movements such as progressivism began to address social problems, calling for government regulation, labor rights, and social justice. These efforts would shape the nation's future in the decades to come. The Gilded Age laid the foundation for modern America, a country of innovation, immigration, and economic might, but also a nation grappling with inequality and social unrest. As the United States entered the 20th century, rapid industrialization and urbanization had created serious social and economic problems. In response, a wave of reform known as the Progressive Era emerged, roughly from the 1890s to the 1920s. Reformers sought to address issues such as corruption in government, unsafe working conditions, child labor, and the influence of powerful monopolies. Leaders like Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson promoted policies to regulate big business, protect consumers, and conserve natural resources. During this time, women's suffrage gained momentum. Activists like Susan B. Anthony and Alice Paul campaigned tirelessly for the right to vote. Their efforts culminated in the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, granting women across the United States the right to vote, a historic victory for gender equality. The Progressive Era also saw advances in public health, education, and social services. Reformers pushed for safer working conditions in factories, improved sanitation in cities, and stricter regulations on food and medicine. Journalism, known as muckraking, exposed corruption and social injustice, influencing public opinion and policy. Meanwhile, the United States was drawn into World War I, 1914 to 1918, initially maintaining neutrality, but eventually joining the Allies in 1917. The war effort spurred industrial growth, technological innovation, and social change, including greater opportunities for women in the workforce. The combination of domestic reforms and the global experience of World War I set the stage for the modern American state. By 1920, the nation had begun to redefine its role in both society and the world, balancing progress, democracy, and emerging international responsibilities. After World War I, the United States entered a period of economic growth, cultural change, and social transformation known as the Roaring Twenties. Industries boomed, fueled by technological innovations such as automobiles, radios, and household appliances. Cars from Henry Ford's assembly lines transformed everyday life, giving Americans new mobility and reshaping cities and suburbs. The decade also witnessed a surge in consumer culture. People bought on credit, went to movie theaters, and embraced new forms of entertainment. Jazz music flourished in cities like New York and Chicago, giving birth to the famous Harlem Renaissance, a celebration of African American culture, art, and literature. However, the 1920s were not just a time of prosperity. Prohibition, starting in 1920, banned production and sale of alcohol. This led to the rise of speakeasies, organized crime, and gang violence, with notorious figures like Al Capone becoming infamous. Social tensions continued as immigration restrictions were tightened and racial discrimination persisted, particularly in the South under Jim Crow laws. Despite the challenges, women gained new freedoms, embracing the flapper lifestyle and asserting independence in fashion, work, and politics. By the end of the decade, the U.S. economy appeared strong, but underlying weaknesses in banking, agriculture, and consumer debt would soon culminate in the Great Depression. The Roaring Twenties, however, remain a symbol of cultural dynamism, technological progress, and the complexities of modern American life. In 1929, the economic boom of the Roaring Twenties came to a sudden and dramatic halt with the Wall Street crash, marking the beginning of the Great Depression. Banks failed, businesses closed, and millions of Americans lost their jobs and savings. By 1933, around 25% of the workforce was unemployed. Breadlines, shanty towns known as Hoovervilles, and widespread poverty became common across the nation. Farmers faced additional hardships as the Dust Bowl devastated crops in the Midwest, forcing families to migrate in search of work. The crisis demanded bold government action. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, a series of programs and reforms designed to revive the economy, provide jobs, and support the unemployed. Agencies like the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, and the Works Progress Administration, WPA, put millions to work building infrastructure and public facilities. Social security programs, banking reforms, and labor protections aimed to stabilize the nation and prevent future economic collapses. The New Deal fundamentally reshaped the relationship between the federal government and the American people, establishing a safety net that remains a cornerstone of U.S. policy today. Despite these efforts, recovery was slow, and the effects of the Great Depression were felt throughout the 1930s. However, the resilience and innovation shown during this period laid the foundation for the United States' eventual emergence as a global economic and political power. By the late 1930s, the world was once again on the brink of war. World War II began in 1939, and the United States initially pursued a policy of neutrality, providing support to the Allies through programs like Lend-Lease. The turning point came on December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The surprise assault killed over 2,400 Americans and destroyed much of the Pacific Fleet. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war on Japan, bringing the United States fully into World War II. American industries shifted to a war economy. Factories that once produced consumer goods now manufactured tanks, airplanes, ships, and weapons. Millions of men and women served in the military, while women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Symbolized by the iconic figure of Rosie the Riveter, the U.S. fought on multiple fronts. In Europe, American forces joined the Allies in campaigns across North Africa, Italy, and France, culminating in the D-Day invasion of Normandy in 1944. In the Pacific, fierce battles such as Midway, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa showcase American military strength and strategic innovation. World War II also saw significant technological and scientific advancements, including the development of radar, jet aircraft, and the atomic bomb. In 1945, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's surrender and the official end of the war. By 1945, the United States had emerged as a global superpower with unmatched industrial capacity, military strength, and influence in shaping the post-war world order, setting the stage for the Cold War and the modern era. After World War II, the United States emerged as one of the world's two superpowers, facing off against the Soviet Union in what became known as the Cold War. This ideological conflict between capitalism and communism defined global politics for decades. In 1947, the U.S. introduced the Truman Doctrine, pledging to support countries resisting communist influence. Around the same time, the Marshall Plan provided economic aid to rebuild war-torn Europe, strengthening democratic governments and creating allies. Domestically, the post-war era brought rapid economic growth, suburban expansion, and the baby boom. Veterans returned home, aided by the GI Bill, which offered education, housing, and job opportunities. Yet tensions remained high as fear of communist infiltration led to McCarthyism, a period of intense anti-communist suspicion and accusations. Internationally, the U.S. faced crises in Berlin, Korea, and elsewhere. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested an atomic bomb, ending the U.S. monopoly on nuclear weapons. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was formed in 1949 to counter Soviet influence, marking the start of formal military alliances in the Cold War. The 1950s also saw the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement, as African Americans challenged segregation and discrimination. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. began organizing protests and advocating for equality, laying the groundwork for future civil rights victories. By 1960, the United States had established itself as a global leader, economically, militarily, and politically, but faced new challenges abroad and at home that would shape the next era of American history. By the 1960s, decades of segregation and racial inequality in the United States had sparked a powerful movement for justice and civil rights. African Americans and their allies demanded an end to discriminatory laws and practices, particularly in the South. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X emerged as voices of change. Nonviolent protest marches and acts of civil disobedience became powerful tools for challenging injustice. The Montgomery bus boycott, 1955 to 1956, sparked by Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat, demonstrated the effectiveness of organized, peaceful resistance. Throughout the 1960s, landmark legislation reshaped the nation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed segregation in public places and prohibited employment discrimination. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 ensured African Americans could exercise their right to vote, particularly in states where barriers had previously prevented them. The movement also inspired social and cultural change. Sit-ins, freedom rides, and marches like the March on Washington in 1963, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech, captured global attention and highlighted the moral urgency of equality. Yet, progress was met with resistance. Racial tensions, riots, and violent backlash occurred in many cities. Despite these challenges, the civil rights movement fundamentally transformed American society, inspiring later movements for women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and other social justice causes. By the mid-1970s, the United States had made significant strides toward racial equality, but the struggle for true social and economic justice continued, shaping the nation's identity and values for generations to come. While the civil rights movement was reshaping American society, the United States became increasingly involved in the Vietnam War, a conflict that would leave a lasting mark on the nation. The war began as part of the broader Cold War struggle against communism. The U.S. provided military and financial support to South Vietnam to resist the communist North, led by Ho Chi Minh. American involvement escalated in the 1960s, with hundreds of thousands of troops deployed to Southeast Asia. The war sparked widespread protests and social movements at home. Young people, students, and activists questioned the morality and purpose of the conflict, leading to the rise of the anti-war movement. Iconic events like the Kent State shootings and massive demonstrations in Washington, D.C., reflected growing public discontent. The 1960s were also a decade of cultural transformation. The counterculture movement, including the hippies, challenged traditional norms, advocating for peace, love, and civil liberties. Music, art, and literature became powerful expressions of dissent and social change. President Richard Nixon eventually pursued a policy of Vietnamization, gradually withdrawing U.S. troops, and in 1973, the Paris Peace Accords officially ended American involvement. The war formally concluded in 1975 with the fall of Saigon. The Vietnam War had profound consequences. It divided American society, eroded trust in government, and influenced future foreign policy decisions. At the same time, the era's social and cultural movements helped expand rights, challenge norms, and define a new generation of American values. After the turmoil of the Vietnam War and the social upheavals of the 1960s and early 1970s, the United States entered a period of economic, political, and technological transformation. The 1970s began with economic challenges. Stagflation, oil crises, and rising unemployment created uncertainty. Yet during the 1980s, under President Ronald Reagan, the economy rebounded through policies promoting tax cuts, deregulation, and defense spending, often referred to as Reaganomics. The U.S. experienced a resurgence of consumer confidence, corporate growth, and technological innovation. This era also witnessed the rise of the information age. Personal computers, early mobile technologies, and advancements in telecommunications began reshaping business and daily life. Companies like IBM and Apple emerged as leaders in this new digital economy. Internationally, the Cold War continued to influence U.S. foreign policy. The Reagan administration pursued a strong stance against the Soviet Union, investing in military programs such as the Strategic Defense Initiative and supporting anti-communist movements worldwide. These policies, combined with internal pressures, contributed to the eventual decline of the Soviet Union, by the late 1980s. Socially and culturally, the United States became increasingly diverse. Immigration reform, civil rights advancements, and changing demographics reshaped urban and suburban communities. Popular culture flourished with television, music, and cinema reflecting the evolving American identity. By 1990, the United States had become a technologically advanced, economically robust, and globally influential nation, prepared to enter the post-Cold War era and face the challenges of the 21st century. The 1990s marked a transformative decade for the United States, both internationally and domestically. The Cold War officially ended in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, leaving the United States as the world's sole superpower. This shift brought new opportunities and responsibilities in global politics, trade, and diplomacy. Economically, the 1990s were a period of remarkable growth. The rise of technology and the internet fueled the so-called dot-com boom, creating millions of new jobs and transforming business, communication, and daily life. Companies like Microsoft, Intel, and Amazon became household names, and the stock market reached unprecedented heights. Socially and culturally, the United States became increasingly diverse. Immigration continued to reshape communities, and issues of civil rights, gender equality, and LGBTQ+ rights gained wider recognition. Pop culture thrived with music, television, and film influencing global trends. Internationally, the U.S. engaged in several conflicts and peacekeeping missions. The Gulf War, 1990 to 1991, demonstrated American military strength, with a coalition force quickly liberating Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. At the same time, the United States played a leading role in promoting democracy, economic cooperation, and humanitarian assistance around the world. By the end of the decade, the United States had solidified its position as a global economic and political leader. Technological innovation, cultural influence, and military power combined to define a nation ready to face the challenges of the 21st century. As the new millennium began, the United States faced both new challenges and unprecedented opportunities. The 21st century has been marked by rapid technological advancement, global conflicts, economic shifts, and social transformation. The September 11, 2001 attacks were a turning point in American history. Nearly 3,000 people were killed when terrorists targeted the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The attacks led to the War on Terror, including military campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq, reshaping U.S. foreign policy and national security priorities. Domestically, technology continued to transform American life. Smartphones, social media, and digital platforms changed how people communicate, work, and access information. Companies like Google, Apple, and Facebook became global giants, influencing both the economy and culture. The 2008 financial crisis tested the nation's resilience, causing widespread unemployment and housing foreclosures. The government responded with stimulus programs, banking reforms, and policies to stabilize the economy. Recovery was gradual, but new industries and entrepreneurship helped fuel growth in the 2010s. Socially, the United States has seen significant progress. Movements for marriage equality, racial justice, and women's rights reshaped public policy and societal norms. Political polarization and debates over healthcare, immigration, and climate change highlighted the complexities of governance in a diverse democracy. By 2025, the United States remains a global leader in technology, culture, and military power. While challenges like climate change, international conflicts, and domestic divisions persist, the nation's history of resilience, innovation, and democratic values continues to guide its path forward into the future. Close your eyes, and let's begin a gentle journey through time. Tonight, we travel back to America in the early 1800s. The United States was still young, only a collection of states along the eastern coast. The cities were small, the towns were few, and beyond the horizon stretched a vast, unknown land. To the east, the Atlantic Ocean kissed the shores. But to the west, there were forests, rivers, and mountains that seemed endless. Beyond them lay the wide prairies, the deserts, and finally, The Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles away. This was the American frontier, a place of promise, but also of mystery, a place where dreams of freedom and land drew families away from their homes. And into the wilderness, at night, travelers would sit around a small fire, their voices low, their eyes on the stars above. The crackling of the fire mixed with the sound of the wind in the grass. It was quiet, it was lonely, and yet it was full of hope. The journey west was never easy. There were rivers to cross, storms to survive, and dangers waiting in the unknown. But for those who went, there was the promise of something greater. A new life, a new beginning. As you listen, let your breathing slow down. Imagine the soft sound of wagon wheels turning on a dirt road. Imagine the faint call of an owl in the distance. And imagine yourself drifting slowly westward, toward the horizon, toward the story of America's frontier. Rest gently, for tonight, the journey has only just begun. The story of America's frontier does not begin with wagons or railroads, but much earlier with the first colonies along the Atlantic coast. In the 1600s, settlers from Europe arrived by ship. They built wooden houses near rivers and forests. Life was simple and often hard. Winters were long, food was scarce, and survival depended on the land, the weather, and on each other. These first towns grew slowly. In New England, families fished the cold seas and farmed rocky soil. In the South, fields of tobacco and cotton stretched across the land. From north to south, the colonies became a patchwork of small worlds, each different, yet connected by one dream, the dream of building a new life. But even as these settlements grew, the horizon always called to them. To the west lay forests no one had mapped, mountains no one had crossed, and rivers that seemed endless. For many, the West was more than a place. It was an idea, a symbol of freedom and possibility. Farmers dreamed of fertile soil. Hunters imagined game beyond measure. Adventurers longed for the thrill of discovery. And slowly whispers spread. One day we will go farther. At night, in the wooden cabins of the colonies, families spoke of the unknown lands beyond the mountains. Children listened wide-eyed as fathers told stories of rivers shining like silver and lands so wide they seemed to touch the sky. These early dreams of the West were quiet, but they never disappeared. They grew stronger with each passing generation, until at last they became the great movement we call the journey to the frontier. So, as you rest tonight, imagine the flicker of a candle inside a colonial home. Imagine the voices of parents telling stories by the fire. And imagine the quiet heartbeat of a nation, still young, still small, but already dreaming of the vast frontier beyond. The dream of the West became real in the year 1803. At that time, the United States was still a young nation, with most people living east of the Mississippi River. Beyond that river lay lands controlled by France. Lands so vast, so unexplored, that they seemed almost endless. President Thomas Jefferson saw the Mississippi River as the key to America's future. The river carried trade, food, and life itself. But what if the land around it fell into unfriendly hands? What if farmers could no longer send their crops to market? So Jefferson made a bold move. He sent American envoys to France, hoping to purchase the port city of New Orleans. A single city, nothing more. But history often surprises us. France, at that time, was struggling with wars in Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French leader, needed money more than he needed distant land. And so he made an astonishing offer. He would sell all of France's territory in North America. This was the Louisiana Territory, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, covering more than 800,000 square miles. For $15 million, the United States doubled in size overnight. It was called the Louisiana Purchase, and it opened the door to the frontier. Imagine the moment when news of the purchase spread. Farmers, trappers, and dreamers looked westward, knowing that new lands now belonged to the nation. Lands of rivers, forests, and prairies. Lands that seemed without end. Of course, these lands were not empty. They were home to Native American nations who had lived there for centuries. For them, the purchase was not a beginning, but a coming storm. Their lives, too, would be forever changed. Still, for America, the Louisiana Purchase marked a turning point. It was the first great step westward, and soon Jefferson would send two explorers, Lewis and Clark, to map the new territory and to unlock the mysteries of the frontier. So, as you rest tonight, picture the Mississippi River flowing quietly under the moonlight. Picture the wide, open land beyond it, untouched unknown waiting, and imagine the sense of wonder as a young nation prepared to walk into its future. After the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the United States owned more land than anyone could imagine, but maps were blank, and no one truly knew what lay beyond the Mississippi River. President Jefferson wanted answers, and so he asked two men, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, to lead an expedition into the unknown. In the spring of 1804, they set out. A small group of soldiers, hunters, and interpreters traveled with them. They carried supplies, journals, and instruments for measuring the land. They called themselves the Corps Discovery. Their journey began at the mouth of the Missouri River. The river twisted and turned, carrying them deeper into wild country. Each day brought something new: endless forests, rolling prairies, and animals few Americans had ever seen. They recorded buffalo roaming the grasslands, grizzly bears standing tall, and great flocks of birds darkening the sky. At night, they sat by the fire, writing notes by candlelight, while the Missouri whispered in the dark. The expedition was not easy. The river was dangerous, storms were fierce, and the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on them. But help came from an unexpected friend. Her name was Sacagawea, a young Shoshone woman, traveling with her infant child. She guided them through the mountains, helped them trade for horses, and showed them the plants and roots that could be eaten. Her presence brought peace, for many native nations saw her carrying her baby and knew the explorers did not come as warriors. After months of struggle, Lewis and Clark finally reached the Rocky Mountains, towering and snow-covered, a barrier between them and the Pacific Ocean. But they pressed on, step by step, until at last, in 1805, they saw the waves of the Pacific crashing on the shore. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine the quiet paddling of oars on a dark river. Imagine the glow of a campfire against the trees. And imagine the soft voice of Sacagawea, guiding the explorers through the wilderness toward a horizon that seemed without end. As more families heard of the Louisiana Territory and of the reports brought back by Lewis and Clark, a quiet movement began. Ordinary people, farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, started to dream of life in the West. They sold their belongings, gathered their families, and loaded everything they could into covered wagons. These wagons became their homes, rolling wooden houses pulled by oxen or horses. Life on the trail was simple, but never easy. Each morning, before the sun rose, families packed their tents, yoked the animals, and prepared for another long day's journey. The wagons moved slowly, sometimes only 10 or 15 miles in a day. Children walked beside them, their shoes kicking up dust, while mothers guided the oxen forward. At night, when the wagon stopped, families circled them together, making a small village under the open sky. Meals were plain: biscuits, beans, or dried meat cooked over fire. Water was drawn from rivers or streams, and every drop was precious. When the fire burned low, families gathered close, sharing quiet stories before sleep. The nights were filled with sounds: the howl of distant wolves, the soft cry of the wind, and the steady breathing of the animals. For many, the trail was not just a journey of miles, but a journey of courage. Illness was common, storms could sweep across the plains, and rivers were dangerous to cross. Yet families pressed forward, driven by hope. Hope for fertile soil, hope for a better future for their children, hope for a life shaped by their own hands. Imagine, as you rest tonight, the flickering firelight shining on wagon wheels, the gentle murmur of voices in the dark, and the endless stretch of stars above. The trail was long, the work was hard, but every step carried them closer to the promise of the West. As families and explorers moved westward, they soon discovered that the lands were not empty. Native American nations had lived on these plains, forests, and rivers for centuries. They had their own villages, traditions, and ways of life, carefully shaped by the land around them. Encounters were often quiet, sometimes friendly, sometimes tense. Traders exchanged goods, beads for furs, blankets for food. Children watched in awe as strangers arrived, curious about these newcomers, and wary of what they might bring. Many native nations welcomed travelers, offering guidance, water, and shelter. They taught families which plants were safe to eat, how to find fresh water in hidden streams, and how to navigate the wide, open plains. In these moments, cultures met gently, sharing knowledge across generations. But there were also misunderstandings. Some travelers took more than they were given, or built camps without asking. And sometimes fear and confusion led to conflict. The trail could be as unpredictable as the land itself, filled with both friendship and caution. Yet even in the quietest moments, there was respect. The travelers saw the wisdom in native traditions, the careful stewardship of the land, and the deep connection people had with rivers, mountains, and skies. Picture it as you listen tonight. A small camp beside a river, smoke curling from a fire, children laughing softly, and an elder teaching travelers how to survive in this vast, beautiful land. The journey west was not just a story of settlers. It was a story of meeting, of learning, and of lives intertwined across time and space. Each encounter left a mark, gentle or deep, on the history of the American frontier. So tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, let your mind wander along the quiet riverbanks, through the whispering forests, and across the endless plains, where two worlds met quietly under the vast, starry sky. By the 1840s, the dream of the West had grown into a movement. Thousands of families packed wagons and set out on what would become known as the Oregon Trail. It stretched over 2,000 miles from Missouri to the fertile lands of Oregon. Every morning, families woke before dawn. The oxen were fed and yoked. Supplies were packed carefully: flour, dried meat, blankets, and tools. Children walked alongside the wagons, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic creak of wooden wheels. The trail passed through rivers and valleys, over rolling hills and across dusty plains. At times, the river was calm and peaceful. Other times, storms rolled in, dark clouds hanging low, and the wind whipping through the tall grass. Life on the trail was a balance of hope and patience. Families shared meals around a campfire. They sang songs softly to pass the evening, telling stories to keep their spirits high. The nights were quiet, except for the occasional howl of wolves, or the distant call of an owl. Along the trail, travelers met others going west. Sometimes, families formed small caravans, traveling together for safety and companionship. They shared food, advice, and encouragement, and always they moved forward, one careful step at a time, toward the promise of fertile lands and a new life waiting at the journey's end. Imagine tonight the soft glow of a campfire on the prairie, the gentle rustle of wagon wheels over dirt, and the distant, shimmering horizon beckoning travelers onward. The Oregon Trail was more than a road. It was a path of courage, of dreams, and of quiet perseverance. And as you drift into sleep, imagine yourself walking beside these families, listening to the whisper of the prairie wind, and letting the endless trail carry you gently into dreams. The Oregon Trail was beautiful, but it was not easy. Every step westward brought new challenges, and families had to be brave, patient, and careful. Rivers needed to be crossed, sometimes with wagons floating on rafts, sometimes with oxen pulling through strong currents. One misstep could mean lost supplies, or worse, lost lives. The land itself could be harsh. Summer heat baked the plains, turning dust into clouds that filled the air. Winters could bring freezing snowstorms in the mountains, forcing families to huddle in their wagons, shivering as the wind howled around them. Illness was another companion on the trail. Fever, dysentery, and cholera spread quickly. Doctors were rare and help even rarer. Yet families kept moving, hoping each new mile would bring safety, fresh water, and fertile soil at journey's end. Wild animals roamed the lands. Bears prowled the forests. Buffalo herds thundered across the plains. And snakes sometimes slithered into camps at night. Travelers learned to respect the wilderness and to move quietly, carefully with alert eyes. Supplies often ran low. Families rationed flour, dried meat, and water. Every item was precious. Sharing became essential, and neighbors helped neighbors whenever they could. Through all these dangers, hope remained the traveler's guiding light. The dream of reaching Oregon, of owning land and starting anew, kept tired feet moving and weary hearts strong. As you listen tonight, imagine the soft crunch of oxen hooves on dirt, the distant call of a hawk overhead, and the flicker of a campfire in the quiet prairie night. Even in the face of hardship, there was beauty, and the endless horizon whispered promises of tomorrow. Sleep now, and let the quiet courage of these families carry you gently into dreams. As the trail stretched endlessly westward, families learned to live with each other in small, moving communities. Each wagon was a home, each fire a gathering place, and each day a lesson in patience and perseverance. Mothers cooked simple meals over open flames, using flour, dried meat, and whatever fresh plants they could find along the way. Children ran alongside wagons, helping where they could, but also finding time to laugh and play, chasing prairie dogs or watching birds in the sky. Fathers guided the oxen, checked maps, and repaired wagons when wheels broke or axles splintered. Older siblings often helped care for younger children or carried supplies on their backs, learning responsibility from an early age. Evenings were moments of quiet reflection. Families gathered around fires, sharing stories of home and of dreams for the new land. Some sang soft lullabies, their voices floating into the cool night air, blending with the whisper of the prairie wind. Travelers learned to depend on each other. Caravans often formed, linking families together for safety and companionship. Neighbors helped neighbors ford rivers, trade goods, or treat minor injuries. In this vast, wild land, community was survival. Life on the trail was filled with both challenge and wonder. Every day brought new scenery, rolling hills, sparkling rivers, and endless skies. Every night brought stars so bright they seemed almost close enough to touch. Imagine yourself walking beside these families tonight, feeling the gentle sway of a wagon, hearing the soft murmur of voices, and watching the sun sink slowly behind the prairie horizon. Even in the midst of a long, difficult journey, there was hope. Hope that one day, all this movement, all this struggle, would lead to a place called home. Rest now. Let the steady rhythm of the trail and the warmth of family carry you gently into peaceful dreams. By the mid-1800s, stories of gold began to spread across America. In 1848, gold was discovered in California, sparkling in the rivers and hills, waiting to be found. News traveled fast, carried by letters, newspapers, and whispers along the trail. Suddenly, thousands dreamed of fortune, of striking it rich, and leaving behind their ordinary lives. People from all walks of life packed wagons, sailboats, or trains, heading westward toward California. Miners carried pickaxes and pans, hoping to scoop up shimmering nuggets from riverbeds. Life during the gold rush was both exciting and harsh. Rivers ran cold, sometimes muddy, and mountains challenged even the strongest travelers. Supplies were scarce, and towns grew quickly, often chaotic and crowded. But hope shone brightly in every heart, each person imagining the glittering gold they might find. Families also moved west, drawn not only by gold but by the promise of new beginnings. They built homes, planted gardens, and slowly shaped communities amid the rugged land. Native nations watched this influx with concern, as newcomers claimed lands that had long belonged to them. The gold rush brought wealth and opportunity, but also conflict and change. Imagine tonight the quiet splash of a pan in a river, the glimmer of sunlight on small flecks of gold, and the hush of early morning as miners began their work. Even in this pursuit of fortune, there was a rhythm to life, rising with the sun, working the land, sharing stories by firelight, and dreaming of brighter days ahead. So as you drift into sleep, picture yourself beside a gentle river, gold shining softly in the sun, and the vast California horizon stretching endlessly before you. The promise of the West continued, carrying dreams and hopes into the quiet night. As families and miners moved west, they faced long journeys over plains, rivers, and mountains. The trail was slow, and life on the wagons could be hard. But a new invention was beginning to change everything. The railroad. Railroads began to stretch across the eastern states, carrying people, goods, and letters faster than ever before. Wooden tracks, long and shiny, snaked through forests, over rivers, and across valleys. The sound of the steam engine whistle echoed across the land, a promise of speed, connection, and progress. For families heading west, the railroad offered hope. Trips that once took months by wagon could now be made in weeks. Supplies could arrive more quickly, and communities could grow along the tracks. Railroads also brought towns to life. Stations became gathering places where travelers shared stories and news. Merchants set up shops, and families found homes near the tracks, building schools, churches, and markets. But the expansion of railroads was not without challenge. Engineers had to carve paths through mountains, bridge rivers, and cross dangerous terrain. And as the tracks spread, Native American nations watched as their lands were crossed and claimed. Still, the railroad became a symbol of the West itself, a bridge between the old life and the new, a ribbon of steel stretching toward opportunity and dreams. Imagine tonight the rhythmic clatter of train wheels over tracks, the hiss of steam, and the gentle sway of a carriage moving through open plains. The sound carries softly in the night, like a lullaby of progress and hope. The rails were more than tracks. They were pathways to new beginnings, connecting people, land, and dreams across the vast American frontier. Even as railroads slowly stretched westward, news still traveled slowly across the vast lands. Letters from family, announcements, and newspapers sometimes took weeks or even months to arrive. To solve this, in 1860, a bold idea was born: the Pony Express. Young riders, brave and fast, would carry mail across thousands of miles, racing from Missouri to California, through forests, rivers, and mountains. Each rider rode a small, strong horse, switching to a fresh one at relay stations every few miles. They braved storms, harsh terrain, and the threat of wild animals. Through snow, rain, and blazing sun, the riders pressed onward, carrying hope and messages to waiting families. The Pony Express became a symbol of courage and determination. Even today, we can imagine the swift rhythm of hooves on dirt, the wind whipping past, and the focused eyes of a rider determined to reach the next station. Families awaited letters anxiously, their hearts lifted when news arrived from faraway towns. The rider's courage connected the young nation, bringing messages, dreams, and sometimes even love to people separated by great distances. Imagine tonight the soft sound of hooves on a trail, the rustle of the wind through tall grass, and the glow of a distant campfire at a relay station. A young rider leans forward, urging his horse gently onward, while the vast frontier stretches ahead. Though the Pony Express lasted only a few years, its spirit lives on. It reminds us of courage, connection, and the quiet determination that shaped America's journey westward. Sleep now, and let the swift rhythm of the Pony Express carry you gently across the wide, starry plains of your dreams. As more families and travelers moved west, small communities began to grow along the trails and rivers. These were the frontier towns, simple, bustling, and full of life. Frontier towns often started as nothing more than a cluster of wooden shacks. A general store, a blacksmith, a saloon, and a few homes were enough to form a new settlement. But over time, schools, churches, and markets appeared, and towns became places where families could rest, trade, and connect. Evenings brought a gentle calm. The townsfolk gathered around fires, sharing stories and news. Music sometimes floated from a saloon, blending with the soft croak of frogs and the whisper of the river. Frontier towns were also places of learning. Travelers shared news from distant lands. Newspapers arrived by wagon or rail, and children learned the ways of both the old and the new worlds. Yet life here was never completely safe. Bandits and wild animals posed threats, and the harshness of the land tested everyone. Still, the towns endured, because the people who lived there carried hope in their hearts. Imagine tonight, a small frontier town under a glowing sunset, the wooden buildings casting long shadows on the dusty street. Families gather outside their homes, children chasing each other as neighbors greet one another. The smell of fresh bread from a bakery drifts softly in the air, and the river nearby murmurs quietly. These towns, humble as they were the heartbeat of the frontier. They connected travelers, settlers, and dreams, and allowed the promise of the West to grow slowly, steadily, like the stars appearing one by one in the quiet night sky. Sleep now, and let the calm rhythm of frontier life carry you gently into your dreams. As the frontier grew, the wide, open plains of the West became home to a new kind of life. Herds of cattle roamed freely, and young men known as cowboys guided them across the land. Cowboys wore wide-brim hats, boots, and carried ropes called lassos. Their days began before sunrise, riding horseback across endless grasslands, checking the cattle, and keeping the herds moving safely. Cattle drives were long and challenging. Horses galloped over rivers, hills, and dusty trails. Storms could appear suddenly, and wolves or rustlers sometimes threatened the herds. Yet cowboys moved with patience, skill, and courage, often singing soft songs to keep their spirits high. Evenings were quiet and simple. Cowboys would build small fires, cook meals in a cast-iron skillet, and watch the sunset paint the plains in gold and orange. The wide sky, the distant mountains, and the gentle murmur of cattle became their companions. Life on the plains was about rhythm and connection. The bond between cowboy and horse was deep. The rhythm of hooves, the low call of the herd, and the whisper of the prairie wind kept the land alive with a gentle music. Imagine tonight, riding slowly on a horse across soft, rolling grass, the evening sun casting long shadows. A small fire glows in the distance, and the quiet sounds of the prairie lull you gently. The vast horizon stretches endlessly, full of freedom, calm, and the gentle promise of the West. Cowboys and cattle drives were not only about work, they were about life lived in harmony with the land, its challenges, its beauty, and its endless skies. Sleep now, and let the calm rhythm of the herd carry you softly into peaceful dreams. As settlers moved further west, they often entered lands that had been home to Native American nations for centuries. At times, newcomers and tribes met in peace, trading goods, sharing knowledge, and learning from each other. But sometimes conflict arose. Land was claimed, hunting grounds were crossed, and misunderstandings could turn tense. The result was a series of conflicts and wars, as both sides struggled to protect what they valued most. Life during these times was difficult. Families on the frontier faced uncertainty, while native nations worked to defend their homes, culture, and way of life. The landscape itself, the rivers, mountains, and plains, witnessed these struggles quietly as both peoples sought survival in a changing world. Yet even in moments of conflict, there were acts of courage, kindness, and understanding. Tribes guided travelers safely, while some settlers tried to learn and respect native traditions. The frontier was a place of challenge, but also of connection, adaptation, and learning. Imagine tonight the soft glow of a campfire under a starry sky, the whisper of the wind through the tall grass, and the distant sound of hooves or voices across the plains. Even in the midst of tension, there was the quiet heartbeat of life, people trying to find their place in a vast, beautiful land. These conflicts remind us that history is complex. full of both hardship and hope, and that the West was shaped by many voices, some loud, some quiet, all leaving traces on the wide, open land. Sleep now, and let the gentle night embrace you, carrying you softly through the vast plains, where the stories of the frontier continue quietly under the stars. As the West became more populated, families began to build permanent homes. These were called homesteads, small farms and houses planted in the wide, open land. Life on a homestead was simple but demanding. Each day began with the rising sun. Fathers plowed the fields and tended animals, while mothers cooked, mended clothes, and cared for the children. Children helped in small ways, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, or carrying water from nearby streams. Evenings were calm, with families gathering around the fire, sharing stories and planning the next day. Communities began to grow around these homesteads. Small schools taught children to read, write, and do arithmetic. Churches offered comfort in gatherings. General stores supplied food, tools, and goods from far away. Even in these quiet, productive days, the land demanded respect. Storms could ruin crops. Animals could wander off, and winters were harsh and long. Yet families persevered, driven by hope and determination. Imagine tonight a small wooden house with smoke curling from a chimney, children laughing softly as they play outside, and the wide, starry skies stretching over the fields. The gentle hum of the prairie wind sings a lullaby of hard work, love, and hope. Settlements and homesteads were more than just places to live. They were symbols of resilience, of dreams rooted in the soil, and of quiet lives shaping the vast frontier. Sleep now, and let the calm rhythm of the homestead, the soft whispers of the fields, carry you gently into dreams. As the West grew, traveling across the vast country remained slow and difficult. The solution came in the form of the Transcontinental Railroad, a single line of tracks stretching from the east to the west coast. Construction began in the 1860s. Workers laid tracks through mountains, across rivers, and over endless plains. It was dangerous work, with harsh weather, treacherous terrain, and fatigue challenging everyone involved. Immigrant laborers, including Chinese and Irish workers, played a crucial role. They drilled, hammered, and built bridges, sometimes risking their lives for every mile of track. When the railroad was finally completed in 1869, it united the country like never before. Goods, mail, and people could travel from coast to coast in days, instead of months. Towns sprang up along the rails, bringing new communities, schools, and markets to once remote areas. The Transcontinental Railroad changed life on the frontier. Families could send and receive letters faster. Merchants could trade products far from home. Travelers could move westward with greater ease. Imagine the gentle chug of a steam engine, the soft whistle echoing across the plains, and the rhythmic clatter of wheels on steel tracks. The train carries people, hopes, and dreams, linking the vast lands from sunrise to sunset. Sleep now, and let the steady rhythm of the train carry you gently across the wide, starry country of your dreams. By the late 1800s, the vast open lands of the West were no longer empty. Towns, railroads, and farms had spread across the plains, and the frontier, the wide, unclaimed wilderness, was slowly disappearing. Life had changed dramatically. Families lived in established towns or on homesteads. Railroads and trails connected distant places. Goods, mail, and news traveled quickly. The wilderness, once endless and unpredictable, now held paths and boundaries. Yet the spirit of the frontier remained. The stories of explorers, pioneers, cowboys, and miners continued to inspire courage, hope, and adventure. The West had been tamed, but not forgotten. Its memories lived in songs, journals, and the quiet hills and rivers. Native American nations faced enormous changes. Their lands were claimed, their lives altered, and their traditions challenged. History remembers both the hardships and the lessons of these times, showing the resilience and strength of people on every side. Imagine tonight walking along a quiet prairie, watching the sun set behind a line of gentle hills. and hearing the soft rustle of grass in the wind. Even as the frontier closed, its spirit whispers through the land, reminding us of courage, hope, and endless possibilities. Sleep now, and let the quiet beauty of the closing frontier carry you gently into dreams of adventure, peace, and wonder. With the frontier officially closed, a new chapter began, the New West. Towns and cities grew steadily, and families settled into daily routines of work, school, and community. Farms stretched across fertile plains, producing wheat, corn, and vegetables to feed the growing nation. Ranchers tended cattle and horses, while merchants and craftsmen supplied the towns with goods and tools. Life was quieter than the adventurous days of the pioneers, but full of steady rhythm and purpose. Children went to school, learning reading, writing, and math, while also hearing stories of cowboys, explorers, and the Lewis and Clark expedition. Community was central to life in the New West. Neighbors helped one another during harvests, shared celebrations at fairs and festivals, and gathered in churches and town halls to connect and support each other. Evenings were gentle. Families gathered around stoves and fireplaces, telling stories, singing songs, or reading together by lamplight. The vast plain still stretched into the horizon, reminding everyone of the wide, open spaces that had once been wild. Imagine tonight a quiet town with soft lamplight glowing through windows, the gentle murmur of a river nearby, and children laughing softly as they play outside. The air carries a sense of fresh bread, hay, and blooming flowers, while the stars appear one by one in the endless sky above. Life in the New West was steady, hopeful, and full of community. It was a time of peace after decades of travel, struggle, and change. And though the frontier had closed, its spirit continued to live in the people, the land, and the stories they shared. Sleep now, and let the calm rhythm of New West life carry you gently into dreams filled with warmth, hope, and quiet adventure. The story of the American West is a journey of dreams, courage, and hope. It begins with vast, untouched lands, rivers flowing freely, forests stretching endlessly, and skies so wide they seem to hold the whole world. Explorers like Lewis and Clark paved the way, mapping the land, meeting native nations, and inspiring countless families to dream of a life in the West. Pioneers packed wagons, braved long trails, and faced rivers, mountains, and storms with determination. Along the way, they met Native Americans, sometimes as friends, sometimes in conflict, but always learning, sharing, and shaping the story of the land together. The Oregon Trail carried families across plains and valleys, through quiet rivers and under starry skies, while the Gold Rush filled hearts with hope and ambition, and the Pony Express connected distant towns with courage and speed. Railroads stretched like silver ribbons, uniting the nation and making life easier for travelers, families, and townsfolk. Frontier towns grew, cattle roamed under the watchful eyes of cowboys, and homesteads flourished, bringing stability and community. Even as conflicts arose, and native nations faced challenges, the spirit of resilience and courage remained strong. The frontier eventually closed, but its story continued in the farms, towns, and cities of the New West. Life in the New West was quieter, filled with steady work, laughter, and family. Children learned, neighbors helped neighbors, and the vast land, once wild and endless, became home to countless dreams. Imagine tonight the golden sunset over rolling plains, the gentle murmur of a river, the flickering glow of a fireplace in a small wooden home, and the whisper of the wind across the fields. The stories of explorers, pioneers, cowboys, and families linger softly in the air, reminding us of courage, hope, and the endless possibilities of tomorrow. As you drift into sleep, let the wide, starry skies of the West carry you gently through dreams of adventure, peace, and wonder. The journey may end here for tonight, but the spirit of the West will live forever in your imagination.